to unify science and economics. But I don't think that's ever been accomplished either. The man who came the closest in the 20th century, many of you are familiar with, and he happens to be Jay's #1 intellectual antecedent, and that is Professor Ludwig von Mises. In The Science of Human Action, which many of you are aware of, von Mises illustrates the matchless efficacy of the free exchange of tangible wealth in the marketplace. The second most important antecedent to the development of win-win theory is Andrew J. Galambos, who founded the Free Enterprise Institute in Los Angeles. Galambos gave cogent expositions on scientific epistemology and on the social technology of securing tangible and intangible wealth through proprietary ventures. The third antecedent is Robert Lefebvre. Robert Lefebvre founded the Freedom School in Colorado, where he gave original commentary to students on maximizing social freedom. Now, von Mises, Galambos, and Lefebvre did not agree on how to achieve the goal of maximizing freedom. And in Snelson's case, he took an entirely different approach than von Mises, Galambos, or Lefebvre. And he calls that approach win-win theory, or the science of social causation. Now, before continuing on the subject of this lecture, which is namely unifying science, religion, and economics, two questions need to be raised. Can science and religion and economics ever be unified? If they can, why should we bother? The reason to consider this is not always obvious. Now, let me ask you a couple questions. Since the emergence of civilization 10 to 12,000 years ago, what have been the most destructive and catastrophic inventions of human ingenuity? Anybody want to take a guess? If we had the time, I'd actually have all of you write it down on a piece of paper and read it to us, but that would take probably all day. In a mere 60-minute lecture, we don't have time, but if you want to do it, see me at lunch. Here are the most destructive and catastrophic inventions of the human mind. And there are two and only two. They are the invention of institutionalized religion, and from that you could probably guess the second, the invention of institutionalized government. Now, if you've only read a little world history, you know that the institutionalized religions have been responsible for the murder, torture, imprisonment of millions upon millions of people, many of them children. And if you read a little more history, you also find that institutional governments have been responsible for the murder, torture, and imprisonment of millions upon millions of people. And you may argue, well, this has been going on for thousands of years. Both religion and government have incited violence forever. Why should we worry about it now? Especially since there may not be anything we can do about it. Well, as far as the survival of our civilization and our human species goes, unless you were one of the millions of victims of such violence who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, you didn't have to worry about the destruction of civilization or the extinction of our species. That is until quite recently being World War II and 1945. Every literate person knows that 1945 marked the entrance of the nuclear age and the beginning of a world for the first time where human populations were threatened by the real use of weapons of mass destruction. How serious is this crisis? Well, Stephen Hawking gave us this warning. Life on Earth is at the ever-increasing risk of being wiped out by a disaster, such as sudden global nuclear war, a genetically engineered virus, or other dangers we have not yet thought of. And you may ask, is Hawking a rabid extremist or a naive alarmist? I don't think so. Even if you are knowledgeable about the magnitude of the crisis, the danger may be out of sight and therefore out of mind. India and Pakistan, for example, have had a long history of mutual hostility. The Hindus and the Muslims of Pakistan have already engaged in 3 bloody wars. The first of these featured the largest and deadliest tank battles since World War II. And as avid warriors, they take their warring very seriously. That now includes the Indo-Pakistan World War I of 1965, the Indo-Pakistan War II of 1971, and the Indo-Pakistan War III of 1999. Now, what sacred paradigms spurs these holy wars between the Muslims of Pakistan and the Hindus of India? It's the firmness of their faith that embraces their devout belief in the practice of win-lose religion. For Muslims to gain, Hindus must be forced to lose, and for Hindus to gain, Muslims must be forced to lose. To be sure, India and Pakistan are a long way from Canada. You would think, well, whether or not they go to war, it's their problem, it's not ours. Or is it? Thus far, faith in their win-lose religions have only incited conventional conflicts, causing the usual carnage of ancient and modern warfare. But if Muslims and Hindus ever decide that it's time to unlock the fury of their unconventional arms, their lethal weapons of nuclear destruction, to wage a holy and glorious 4th Indo-Pakistan War, the collateral damage could surpass all of the damage in human history combined. If they incinerate themselves by launching their own cache of 50 to 60 nuclear warheads at each other, those far from the fury may cry, "What a tragedy!" Too bad for them, but unfortunately, or fortunately as it will be, we're nowhere near there. Well, if you know anybody with such a Pollyanna attitude, wish them goodbye and good luck. Because wherever they may be, there is no safe harbor. Many of you have never been to Pakistan or India, which are on the other side of the world. But even if you live in North America or Africa or wherever, you might as well be at ground zero. And here's why. If there should ever be an Indo-Pakistan War IV, we have a potential for a catastrophe that even if you live in far-off places, you and your family could become mortal statistics. Americans Alan Roebuck, professor of climatology at Rutgers University, and Owen Toome, chair of oceanic and atmospheric sciences at the University of Colorado in Boulder, they and their colleagues in their research have reached this grim conclusion. New analysis reveal that a conflict between India and Pakistan, for example, in which 100 nuclear bombs were dropped on cities and industrial areas, only 4/10 of the world's more than 25,000 warheads, would produce enough smoke to cripple global agriculture. A regional war could cause widespread loss of life, even in countries far away from the conflict. In short, these scientists have concluded that a limited regional nuclear war could blot out the sun, starting much of the human race. With deadly implication, it turns out that launching less than 0.5% of existing nuclear arms in some minor regional war could be enough to induce nuclear winter. As destructive as nuclear and chemical weapons may be, an even more frightening weapon